Day 6 of Grid Down. You survived the flash. You survived the initial thermal pulse. You even survived the panic of the first 72 hours. But you are about to learn a very hard lesson about modern survival. The blast wave was just the opening act. By hour 120, the real Grim Reaper clocks in, and its name is medical collapse. You look at your child sitting in the corner of your basement shelter. They have a small cut on their arm from a shattered window on day 1. You put a bandage on it and forgot about it. But now they are burning up with fever, shivering under heavy blankets, looking at you with dry, cracked lips, begging for a drink of water you do not have or a doctor you cannot find. You are realizing that without the medical supply chain, that tiny piece of flying glass is going to take them away from you. This is the timeline where logistics fail and biology takes over. You leave your family secured at home to do a recon run downrange to the local county hospital. You approach St. Jude Memorial from 2 blocks away, but the smell hits you first. A copper metallic stench mixed with unwashed bodies and raw sewage. The backup generators died on day 3. The parking lot is a sprawling camp of the desperate, moaning in the dark. Vehicles are abandoned on the lawns. People are slumped against the brick exterior, holding bloody rags to crush injuries from collapsed roofs, waiting for an intake nurse who is never coming out. Inside the glass doors, it is pitch black. The emergency room is a ghost ship. You hear the echoes of nurses shouting for security, but the security walked off the job 48 hours ago. You stand there, realizing that the sanctuary you promised your spouse you would find does not exist. The building is structurally intact, but functionally, it is a tomb. The masses out in the parking lot are reacting exactly how Hollywood taught them to. They are standing in lines, clutching their insurance cards, waiting for order to be restored. They believe that because the building is made of concrete and has a red cross on the sign, salvation is imminent. They grab at the scrub tops of any exhausted staff member who dares to step outside, begging for a triage assessment. When a man with a severe thermal burn collapses, the crowd shouts for a doctor, expecting a trauma team to rush out with a gurney and an IV bag. But nobody comes. The crowd gets angry, throwing rocks at the triage windows, demanding the care they feel entitled to. They do not understand that anger will not generate electricity, and entitlement does not manufacture morphine. They are burning their final reserves of caloric energy, screaming at an empty building, while their loved ones bleed out on the asphalt. Let us talk about the hard logistics. 80% of medical resources, including hospital beds, personnel, blood, and drugs, are concentrated in densely populated target areas. They are gone. The surviving physician-to-patient ratio in your mid-sized town just hit 1 to 663. There are 64 patients competing for a single hospital bed. You might think the National Guard, or FEMA, is going to roll in with mobile surgical hospitals. That is a fantasy. In a nuclear escalation, federal assets are deployed to secure critical military infrastructure, not to hand out bandages in suburbia. You are entirely on your own. Most people think they have 2 weeks of food and basic first aid. The math says they have 4 days. Stop guessing. Go to protocolsurvival.com and get your real survival score. The calculator is free to try. If you rely on the cavalry coming to save you, your family will pay the price for your optimism. The math does not care about your tax bracket. The specific complication here is not just that the hospital is out of supplies. It is that the hospital has become the most dangerous place in your sector. Without municipal water pressure, there is no autoclave sterilisation. Without power, the negative pressure rooms that isolate airborne pathogens are just stagnant boxes. By day 6, the concentration of infectious disease in that facility is astronomical. Bringing your injured child here to get a laceration stitched means exposing their compromised immune system to staph, cholera, and every other opportunistic infection brewing in the hallways. You thought you were bringing them to a place of healing, but you are walking them into a biological hot zone. The realization crushes you. You have to turn around and walk away from the hospital, ignoring the pleas of the dying, because stepping inside means bringing a secondary contagion back to your safe room. Your home is now the only trauma center left. You make it back to your house. Your neighbor, a guy you used to share beers with over the fence, is lying on your couch. On day 1, the shockwave blew out his sliding glass door. A shard of glass the size of a kitchen knife embedded itself deep into his thigh. At the time, you pulled it out, packed it with some gauze from your camping kit, and wrapped it tight. He told you he was fine, just needed to rest. But today is day 6. You peel back the crude dressing. The smell of necrotic tissue hits the back of your throat. Red streaks are radiating up his leg toward his groin. His skin is clammy and his eyes are unfocused. He looks at you and asks when the ambulance is coming. You have to look this man in the eye and lie to him, knowing full well that you are watching a preventable death unfold in your living room. The tragic failure of the first few days was the assumption of normal timelines. Your neighbor treated his traumatic injury like a sports accident. He elevated it, put a dirty bag of frozen peas on it before the freezer thawed, and decided to ride it out until the phones worked again. This is standard normalcy bias. People believe that if they just keep still, the body will heal, or the paramedics will eventually arrive. They use half measures. They dab a little hydrogen peroxide on a deep crush injury and wrap it in a torn t-shirt. They do not realize that the rules of biology have accelerated. By waiting out the initial chaos, they missed the only window of opportunity they had. They treated a grid-down trauma wound with grid-up patients, and now the infection has breached the bloodstream. They failed to act violently and decisively against the infection on day 1, and now day 6 has arrived to collect the debt. The medical logistics of blast trauma dictate a very strict timeline. Traumatic injuries from the blast wave require surgical intervention ideally within 36 to 48 hours of radiation exposure. You might think, I will just boil a knife and cut the dead tissue out myself, Civil War style. That objection ignores the biological reality of fallout. After that 48-hour window, the onset of radiation-induced immunosuppression makes any surgery extremely dangerous. If you cut into him now, his body cannot fight off the environmental bacteria you introduce. His blood lacks the platelets to clot properly. The 48-hour window was the only time his body had the reserves to survive the shock of primitive surgery. Now you are outside the wire. Without a sterile operating theatre, general anaesthesia, and massive blood transfusions, attempting to debride that wound on your couch will just speed up his heart failure. You are caught in a logistical trap with no exit. The specific threat multiplier here is that you are not just fighting a dirty wound, you are fighting a heavily compromised recovery environment. In a normal disaster, a healthy immune system might wall off the infection into an abscess. But the ambient radiation from the fallout plume that brushed your town on day 2 has degraded his bone marrow. The white blood cell decline is happening right in front of you. By day 6, his body simply stops producing the soldiers needed to fight the war in his bloodstream. Sepsis sets in. His blood pressure tanks while his heart rate skyrockets. You are forced to watch the mechanical failure of a human body, knowing that the real killer was not the nuclear detonation 100 miles away, but the microscopic bacteria living on your own living room floor. You failed to secure a sterile perimeter, and the guilt of that oversight is a heavy rucksack to carry. You leave your dying neighbour on the couch and go to check your family in the basement. Your spouse is holding your youngest daughter. You shine your tactical flashlight over her face. She looks pale, exhausted. You tell her to open her mouth. Her gums are slowly, steadily bleeding into her teeth. There is no trauma. She did not fall. You replay the last 6 days in your head. On day 2, before you had the windows fully sealed with plastic and duct tape, she stood by the shattered glass of the front room, watching the strange dust settle on the lawn for maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes of exposure. Now, on day 6, the latency phase of acute radiation syndrome is ending. The invisible poison is making itself known. You promised her you would keep her safe. You built the shelter. You stockpiled the water. But you let her stand by the window, and now her bone marrow is dying. The guilt is suffocating. Other families in your neighbourhood are dealing with the exact same symptoms, but their reaction is pure denial. They see the nausea, the fatigue, the random nosebleeds, and they tell themselves it is just a stress reaction or a stomach bug going around the shelter. They give their kids a chewable vitamin, force them to drink lukewarm water, and tell them to sleep it off. They treat radiation sickness like a winter flu because the alternative is too terrifying to process. They refuse to accept that the dust on their shoes is emitting gamma radiation. By treating it like a common cold, they allow their family members to continue wearing contaminated clothing and sleeping on contaminated blankets. They are actively rubbing the fallout deeper into their pores while hoping a good night of sleep will cure a cellular breakdown. Panic is dangerous, but denial is lethal. They are hugging their children while unknowingly cross-contaminating the only safe space they have left. Let us break down the logistics of radiation sickness. By day 6, the acute drop in lymphocytes and platelets is absolute. Without granulocyte colony stimulating factor and heavy intravenous antibiotics, a radiation-exposed individual is a sitting duck for fatal infection. You might say, I bought a huge bottle of potassium iodide pills on the internet just for this. That is the steelman argument every prepper makes. Let me aggressively debunk that. Potassium iodide only does one highly specific thing. It saturates the thyroid gland to prevent the absorption of radioactive iodine-131. It does absolutely zero to protect your bone marrow, your gastrointestinal tract, or your skin from external gamma and beta radiation. You popped an iodine pill and thought you had a force field. You do not. Your daughter's white blood cell count is crashing, and an iodine tablet is about as useful as a breath mint. Without sophisticated hematology drugs, her ability to fight off a simple head cold is gone. The unique complication of a post-nuclear environment is that minor hazards become fatal threats. Because your daughter's immune system is effectively offline from the radiation, a mosquito bite, a scratch from a pet, or rubbing a dirty eye can induce a life-threatening systemic infection. You are living in a basement that has not been properly ventilated in 6 days. Dust, mold spores, and human waste particles are accumulating in the stagnant air. Every breath she takes introduces pathogens into lungs that have no defences left. You cannot just lock the door and wait it out. You have to create a surgically clean microenvironment inside an already filthy fallout shelter. You are forced to use your precious, dwindling water supply to wash her skin and clothes, sacrificing your drinking water to buy her a few more days against the invisible army of bacteria. You are trading dehydration tomorrow for avoiding sepsis today. These are the impossible choices of day 6. You walk upstairs to the kitchen to scrounge for supplies. The house is dead quiet without the hum of appliances. You open the refrigerator. A wave of sour, rotting air hits you. The milk has turned into a solid mass. The meat is green. But you do not care about the food. You reach into the butter compartment and pull out a small glass vial. It is your spouse's insulin. It has been sitting in a rapidly warming box for 144 hours. You hold it up to the beam of your flashlight. The liquid inside, normally crystal clear, has a faint, cloudy suspension to it. The proteins are denaturing in the summer heat. Without this liquid, your spouse will go into diabetic ketoacidosis. You stare at the tiny vial, realizing that their life is entirely dependent on a delicate chemical compound that is degrading by the hour. The grid did not just keep the lights on, it kept the medication stable. The standard reaction to a medication shortage is panic rationing. People take their pill bottles, dump them on the table, count the remaining tablets, and decide to cut their doses in half. Your neighbour with hypertension starts taking half a pill a day to stretch a 1-month supply into 2 months. The logic seems sound to a terrified civilian, but pharmacokinetics do not care about your budgeting skills. Cutting blood pressure medication alters the steady state in the bloodstream, leading to wild, uncontrolled hypertensive spikes. Cutting seizure medication lowers the threshold, triggering massive convulsions right when medical help is completely unavailable. They think they are buying time, but they are actually guaranteeing a severe medical event. By underdosing, they get zero therapeutic benefit and all of the withdrawal symptoms. They are trying to negotiate with their chronic illnesses, and the illnesses are winning. A half dose of a life-saving drug is often just a prolonged, painful way to achieve the exact same zero-sum outcome. Let us look at the chronic disease crisis by the numbers. Surveys from war-torn regions show that half of the population immediately loses access to vital medications. In a post-nuclear environment, that number approaches 100%. Insulin, antihypertensives, anticoagulants, immunosuppressants. They are either destroyed in the blast zones where they are manufactured or trapped in logistics hubs that have no trucks running. You might argue the local pharmacy chains have massive warehouses, they will distribute emergency stocks. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of modern logistics. Pharmacies use just-in-time delivery. They do not have a massive backroom filled with a 6-month supply of insulin. They rely on daily truck deliveries. When the grid dropped, the supply chain vanished instantly. The medication currently sitting on the shelves of your local CVS is all that exists for your entire zip code. There is no strategic reserve coming to replace it. Once the vials in your warm fridge go bad, you drop off the edge of the supply chain cliff. The most unpredictable complication on day 6 is the sudden withdrawal of psychiatric medications across the population. A significant percentage of your town relies on SSRIs, antipsychotics, and anxiolytics to maintain baseline mental health. Now throw those individuals into a high-stress, sensory-deprived, blackout environment while their brain chemistry forcefully rebounds. You look out your window and see a man walking down the middle of a street, screaming at shadows, clutching a tire iron. He is not a zombie. He is an accountant whose Lexapro ran out. The threat matrix changes when you are dealing with profound paranoia and chemically induced erratic behaviour. You cannot use standard threat de-escalation tactics on someone experiencing acute withdrawal psychosis. Your perimeter defence now has to account for neighbours who have completely lost their grip on reality. You must protect your family not just from looters seeking food, but from unpredictable individuals whose minds have been unmoored by the sudden absence of modern pharmacology. You retreat back into the basement. It is time to turn your shelter into a home ward. You drag 2 sleeping bags together. You tear up your cleanest remaining cotton bed sheets to use as bandages, soaking them in a heavily diluted bleach solution. The chemical smell burns your eyes, masking the odour of sweat and sickness. You arrange your meagre supplies on a folding table: a thermometer, a half-empty bottle of ibuprofen, a single roll of medical tape, and a flashlight you have to crank by hand every 5 minutes. You are trying to project calm authority for your spouse and child, moving with purpose, setting up stations, but your hands are shaking. You look at this pathetic array of plastic and cloth, realizing how entirely inadequate it is against crush trauma and acute radiation syndrome. You are playing doctor in a cave, trying to hold back the dark with a few scraps of white fabric. The fatal error most preppers make in this moment is reaching for their phone to look up how to perform wound debridement or administer an IV. They assume they can just Google their way out of a medical crisis. They stare at the dead screen, swiping desperately, realizing that all their saved bookmarks, all their downloaded PDFs on cloud drives are completely inaccessible. The internet is gone. When the grid goes down, your cloud notes are gone. You need a system that works offline, a system that stays resident on your device and provides tactical medical standard operating procedures without requiring a cell tower. I built Protocol Survival to be that system. Secure your data now at protocolsurvival.com. If your medical knowledge relies on a server farm 2 states away, your knowledge base is zero. You cannot perform emergency triage from memory if you have never done it downrange. You are flying blind in the dark. You inventory your medical kit. You need heavy-duty antibiotics. You might proudly think, I am ahead of the curve. I bought a massive jar of veterinary fish antibiotics 5 years ago. Let us steelman this prepper myth right now. Yes, amoxicillin is amoxicillin, but you did not store it in a climate-controlled vault. You kept it in a fluctuating garage. The active pharmaceutical ingredients have degraded. More importantly, you assume a broad-spectrum penicillin will solve every problem. It will not touch the anaerobic bacteria currently eating your neighbour's leg, and it will not reverse the cellular damage of your daughter's radiation exposure. Having a bottle of expired fish pills does not make you a combat medic. Without the ability to run a culture and sensitivity test, you are firing blindly into the dark, hoping the drug matches the bug. You are risking severe allergic reactions and antibiotic resistance, precisely when a secondary complication guarantees death. Your stockpile is an illusion of safety. The complication of running a home ward in a nuclear scenario is cross-contamination inside a sealed environment. You taped the doors and windows to keep the fallout particles out, but in doing so you trapped everything else inside. Your basement has zero air exchange. Your neighbour is coughing up fluids. Your daughter is sweating through her fever. Every time someone uses the makeshift bucket toilet, aerosolized bacteria enter the stagnant air. You are operating a biohazard ward in a submarine. If one person contracts dysentery, the lack of ventilation ensures everyone gets it within 48 hours. You cannot open a window to air the place out because the external radiation levels are still lethal. You are trapped between the invisible fire outside and the biological rot inside. You have to institute draconian quarantine measures within a 200 square foot space. If you fail to separate the clean zone from the hot zone, your entire family will drown in their own fluids. The reality sets in. Your supplies are gone. You have to leave the house again. You gear up, tape your cuffs, put on your N95 mask, and head toward the chain pharmacy 3 blocks over. You approach the building, keeping low. The heavy glass front doors have been driven through by a pickup truck. The alarm bells are dead. You step over shattered glass and overturned display racks. The cosmetics aisle is untouched, but the pharmacy counter at the back looks like a bomb went off. Shelves are stripped bare. Pill bottles are crushed into the linoleum, their contents ground to dust by the boots of panicked looters. You are sweeping your flashlight over the debris, looking for a single intact bottle of Augmentin or a viable vial of insulin. The silence is deafening. You realize you are picking the bones of a dead civilization, desperate to find one scrap of chemistry to keep your family breathing. As you search the floor, another man steps out from behind the consultation counter. He looks exactly like you. Tired, dirty, desperate. He is holding an iron crowbar. The standard civilian reaction is to try and negotiate. People think they can barter, share, or reason their way out of a resource conflict. They raise their hands and say, "I just need antibiotics for my kid. We can split whatever is left." They assume the social contract is still intact. But diplomacy requires leverage, and when your child is dying, leverage does not exist. The man gripping the crowbar does not care about your daughter. He has a wife in a basement across town, slipping into a diabetic coma. He views you not as a fellow survivor, but as an obstacle standing between his wife and survival. Trying to talk it out makes you vulnerable. In a grid-down, zero-sum environment, hesitating to establish dominance because you want to be civilized will get your skull fractured. You see the heavy steel doors of the narcotic and critical medication safes behind the counter. You might think, "I brought a sledgehammer. I will just breach the safe and take the high-grade antibiotics and painkillers." Let us demolish that action movie logic. Pharmacy safes are commercial-grade, TL-rated steel and composite vaults designed to stop professional burglars with power tools. You are a tired, dehydrated civilian swinging a manual hammer. Furthermore, these safes utilize electronic time delay locks. When the regional power grid collapsed and the internal batteries drained, those electronic deadbolts failed in the locked position. They are permanently sealed. You cannot pick them, you cannot bash them open, and you cannot pry them. The medicine you need to save your neighbour from sepsis and your daughter from immune collapse is sitting 3 inches away behind an impenetrable wall of steel. You are staring at a fortress of modern medicine that you are permanently locked out of. The logistics beat you. The unique complication here is the nature of the violence you face. You are not fighting trained insurgents or disciplined operators. You are fighting ordinary, terrified people pushed to their absolute biological limit. The man with the crowbar lunges at you. It is wild, uncoordinated, but fueled by the hysterical strength of a father who has nothing left to lose. He swings for your head. You deflect, driving your shoulder into his chest, sending him crashing into the empty shelving. You did not want to hurt him. You are just an insurance adjuster. He is a middle school teacher. But the nuclear flash erased those titles. Now you are just 2 mammals fighting in the dark over chemical scraps. You secure the perimeter, grab a handful of scattered, unlabeled pill bottles from the floor and retreat. The violence is not tactical, it is tragic. It is the ugly, desperate clawing of decent people forced into a corner by a dead world. You make it back to the basement, locking the heavy door behind you. You dump your scavenged pills onto the folding table. You sort them by shape and imprint code using your flashlight. You hit the jackpot. You found exactly 14 intact tablets of a broad-spectrum antibiotic. But the relief evaporates in seconds. You look at your neighbour, sweating through the couch, his leg rotting from sepsis. Then you look at your daughter, her immune system destroyed by radiation, fighting a respiratory infection. 14 tablets is exactly enough for one full, life-saving course for one person. It is not enough for 2. You hold the small plastic bottle in your hand. The plastic feels impossibly heavy. Both of them look up at you from the dark, their eyes pleading. You have to decide who gets the medicine and who you have to watch slowly, agonizingly die over the next 4 days. This is the true face of day 6. The human impulse is to be fair. Most people in this situation would take the 14 pills, divide them into 2 piles of 7, and give half to the neighbour and half to the daughter. They think that shared sacrifice is the noble path. They want to spread the hope around. But biology does not respect your sense of morality. By halving the dose, you ensure that neither person receives the therapeutic threshold required to eradicate the infection. The bacteria in your neighbour's leg will mutate, build resistance to the weak dose, and kill him anyway. Your daughter's compromised system will be overwhelmed as soon as her short course ends. By trying to save both so you do not have to make the hard choice, you actively guarantee that both of them will die. Fairness in triage is a luxury of a functioning society. In a grid-down scenario, splitting the dose is just a coward's way of avoiding responsibility while causing 2 deaths. The hard logistics of antibiotics hinge on the minimum inhibitory concentration. You must maintain a steady state of the drug in the bloodstream for the full prescribed duration to achieve bactericidal effect. You might say, "I cannot just let my neighbour die, that makes me a murderer." You think morality alters microbiology. It does not. The Steelman argument is that triage is inherently cruel, but it is mathematically necessary. If you do not commit to a full course for one patient, the pills are wasted. You are a force multiplier for your family, and your primary directive is the survival of your bloodline. Your neighbour is a casualty of war. Allocating the full course to your daughter is the only mathematically sound tactical decision. It is brutal, it is cold, and it defies every civilized instinct you have. But you are no longer operating in a civilized world. You are operating in a biological war zone, and survival requires absolute ruthlessness. The final complication of day 6 is the psychological toll of triage. You walk over to your daughter and administer the first dose. You do not give any to your neighbour. You cannot explain it to him because the truth will destroy the fragile piece of the shelter. So you lie. You tell him the pills you found were not the right kind. Over the next 48 hours, you have to sit in that small, confined basement, listening to his breathing become shallow, listening to his fevered moans, knowing that you had the power to save him in your pocket. The psychological trauma of actively deciding to let a good man die so your child can live will haunt you long after the radiation settles. You saved her body, but the guilt will permanently alter your mind. You will carry his ghost with you for the rest of your life. Survival is not just staying alive, it is living with what you did. You look around your dimly lit basement. The hand crank flashlight flickers, casting long, dark shadows against the concrete walls. You listen to the ragged breathing of the people you swore to protect. The medical collapse of day 6 strips away every illusion we hold about our independence. We like to think we are self-sufficient because we bought a water filter and a first aid kit. But the truth is, we are deeply, inherently dependent on a fragile web of chemistry, logistics, and supply chains that stretch across the globe. When those chains snap, the centuries of medical progress we take for granted vanish overnight, leaving us vulnerable to the microscopic predators we thought we had conquered. The grid is not just wires and transformers that power our televisions. The grid is the thin, invisible line of medicine and sterilization that keeps biology from devouring us. Stay alert, stay disciplined, and never assume the cavalry is coming. Protocol out.